Well, Kathy, ladies and gentlemen, I apologise for the somewhat casual dress. I don't know what a tribal elder should wear, and Kathy and I spoke perhaps of a lion skin flung over my shoulder, but I'm rather restricted at the moment. This looks much worse than it feels. It doesn't feel at all, but I somehow managed to break my ulna, so I have to lock my right arm rigid. Anyway, it's a great honour to be asked to become a tribal elder. And what can I say? I mean, I can certainly vouch that I qualify from the elder point of view. That's okay. But the tribal wisdom, wisdom's a bit more difficult to come by. And you will all have to make your judgment on my particular, sometimes awkward view of what's going on. I'm very well aware that I'm following Jane Goodall. A number of you I know were there. And I thought, I'd heard her speak many times, but I thought that was the best lecture I'd ever heard her give. I thought it was terrific. And the way that she managed to weave her theme into her life history. And she retained a powerful message of hope, which goodness knows I want to do also. And I will try. But I have to begin tonight with some, for me, very awkward thoughts. When Kathy and Chris and I met last week to discuss some final ideas, I was feeling very down because I felt, here am I'm coming along to ask you to begin to think about really long-term, serious issues which affect us all as individuals in a very sensitive way, at the moment that the world is in a morass of conflict. I mean, look at the Middle East. What is one to say about that place? If one thinks just of one refugee camp in Lebanon, thousands of young children growing up there. They've been in tents for 3 years. What kind of a existence? How is their humanity going to be expressed? And it's a morass of warring factions. And how that's such an immediate problem that I don't know how we can bring ourselves in this very fortunate, sheltered part of the world to reflect on the long-term issues. But of course, in the end, somebody has to keep doing that. And we will try. So I want to, I think, start by introducing 2 words, because they're going to recur in what I'm saying through this evening. And do remember the distinction of it. When I talk about things being necessary, I do not imply that they are sufficient. They manifestly are not sufficient, but they may be absolutely necessary. Now, I'm going to talk about human numbers, how many people there are around, and I must put to you some truths as I see it, which are likely to be challenging, and I rather hope you don't all agree with me. Anyway, I'd better start out with a kind of admonition, which I agree with. This is our aim, isn't it? I don't know in what context Rockefeller was making this statement. I rather suspect it was because he didn't like the idea of anybody saying, you know, we should control the population. Never mind, the message which we give to, that is our aim, surely. And we have everything to play for, absolutely everything. Well, are we ready to share? Well, we jolly well better be, because we don't have any alternative. I'm reminded that the first of Al Gore's book about inconvenient truth, well, no, sorry, that was his second book. His first book was called Planet in Peril. And there have been, you know, Earth in Crisis is another title that one comes across. Absolute bunkum. The planet is not in peril at all. What is in peril is us, of course, and the life that we try to lead. And if we don't manage things well, manage our own affairs, the planet will shrug us aside it won't nothing will be noticed, nothing will change. We shall go on circling the sun because, of course, this is what we have to share. This is the Earth and the Moon taken from Voyager 1 in 1977. That would have been, let me see, I think 7 years after it was launched. And so one of the things I want to really say is that the fantastic ingenuity and brilliance when human beings really put their minds on a worthwhile problem. Voyager, as you may know, is now left the solar system. It's in interstellar space, and it takes 37 hours to get a message to and from it. That's at the speed of light. But that's what we've got. And the Earth's about 4.5 billion years old. Complex life, only about 800 million of that. You'll all be familiar with these clocks, which put the Earth's history in 12 hours. And there we are. And we all know that complex life didn't come in until quite a way through, 2/3 the way through. And the sort of animals and plants that we know about are around here. And of course, human beings turn up a few seconds before midnight. What is so interesting about that clock is that it appears to stop at midnight. But of course, time doesn't stop at midnight, it goes on. And what is going to happen in the next 12 hours? Well, we know from the cosmologists that the sun, at the absolute minimum, will give us 50 million years more decent existence. It may give us much more than that, but we're pretty sure of that it won't begin to swell and become uncomfortably hot for us for at least 50 million years. Now, we've only been on the planet for 250,000 years at maximum as Homo sapiens. So there's an awful lot of future to play for, isn't there? An inconceivable amount of future. So that's what we have to do if we wish to go on, and that's what we have to share. Now, through the whole of this time that the planet's been existing, and once life got going, life and the Earth have shared interlocking histories. And this is a very famous slide, a transcription made by an old colleague of mine. Time along the bottom here, and this is really quite recent because this is 600 million years ago when complex life really got going. In other words, the history of the planet would go right out into the zoo outside there. And this is a measure of the complexity of life, the diversity of life, erase complexity, diversity of life. And it's, in general, increased with some setbacks. One major setback here, you can see life hasn't always had an easy ride, but it's survived and gone on increasing in diversity. This, I must say, a lot of this is due to the rise of the insects, which are, of course, about 4/5 of all known species anyway. But, and then there was a big setback about 65 million years ago, which everybody knows about because that's, of course, when the dinosaurs went out. And what would we do without the dinosaurs? Anyway, it's been a rocky road. And biologists list, as you can see, 5 mass extinctions, as they're called. The 6th mass extinction is going on at the moment. Now, these 5 extinctions have some marvelous geological mysteries about them. What caused this sudden decrease in life? What was the threat? And geologists are still debating this. I'm very glad they are. I mean, the good science comes from mysteries, from what you don't know. And what was it? Was it warming? Was it cooling? Gigantic eruptions which smothered the Earth in ash and sulfur dioxide and carbon dioxide? Was it bolide impact, as much been talked about for extinction number 5, and so on? The 6th extinction has a more easy explanation. There have been climate changes over the last, say, 500,000 years or so, which have not made it the easiest of times for particularly big mammals, big advanced animals. But there's no question that we are involved, and it's us that is involved in the big extinction. That's the threat. Our fellow creatures are threatened by the sheer weight of our presence. I tell you nothing that you're not aware of here. But we want to be fairly hard about things. It's no good taking just a wishy-washy despair view of it. I remember Bob May, who was the government chief scientist at the time, giving a lecture about extinction rates and what they implied. And some young guy, got up at the back in the best intention and said, "You don't seem to be putting across a sense of urgency. Don't you realize that while you've been speaking, 5 species have gone extinct?" To which Bob May said, "Can you put a name to one of them?" No, of course one couldn't. One has only an idea of what kind of things are going on. If you're going to make any kind of rational response, you have to get some hard data. And the place to get hard data is the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, IUCN, an intergovernmental international thing. And they have been going, this is their 50th year of running something called the Red Data Book, in which they try to get decent estimates of what's happening. If we're going to do anything about reducing extinction, we need to know what is actually involved, which are the species that we need to pay attention to, which habitats are the key thing. And here they are, they classify the species that they've measured, let me get the figure right, 71,576 species have been assessed at the latest report. They want to get up to 160,000. That's still only about a tenth of known species, but it would give you a good baseline. And they've got different categories here. Quite a large category is data deficient, as you can see, but the ones we have to worry about are this lot here. Some are least concern. Nobody's concerned about brown rats or American cockroaches, and so on. But here are the groups which are dangerous. And we know that there are some in this category. And the way that trends are going is such, here is a pie chart, is such that what we have built in here is a huge mass of species which are having a bad time, havering on the brink. And I'm afraid that even with the best optimism in the world, one would have to feel that there's going to be a lot of extinction going on over the next 50 years, whatever we do. We're going to lose a lot of species. Now, biologists have made studies which indicate that in terms of evolutionary future, the loss of species will, of course, restrict the evolutionary future. I'm talking here in millions of years, but may not be fatal. There may be enough representatives of the different types of animal, for instance, to mean that, given a chance, life can recover. But for us as human beings, living in the world we are now, loving the natural world as we do, there are some sad times ahead, I think. These are two sort of totem species for me, really, of species that are hovering on the brink. It would be very hard to be optimistic about either of these species. Southeast Asian, I'm just reading a note in the Times today about the loss of rhinos in Africa has been the worst this year ever recorded. They've already exceeded the figures for the whole of last year, and there's a desperate struggle going on. I don't think many of these maniacs, rogues, are going after Sumatran rhino horn. It's the bigger African species which are after. And a lot of people, of course, don't know that these animals exist. So they're not going to feel a loss. I doubt if many members of the cabinet are worried about the Sumatran rhinos. okay? But I worry about them, and a lot of you do as well, I'm sure. It is a grave loss, and it's because of our, basically because of our plundering of resources. Now, it's habitat loss, of course, which is really the threatening thing for most of our fellow creatures. Biodiversity is not just big fancy animals like this. It's the whole range of interplay of millions of species of plant and animal, which together with checks and balances interacting within them, keep an ecosystem going. And when you pull out, when some species becomes extinct, when an alien species from somewhere else gets introduced and begins to invade a new habitat, you're never quite sure what the results are going to be, where things will really go badly wrong. And the best metaphor I've come across to understand this came from an American biologist. Well, this is the old man, wise man, truly wise man. And this is what really I was saying. I doubt if the Sumatran rhino is discussed around the cabinet table. Most people are not aware of what is being done. But probably some of you must have played this game. It's a great game. You build the tower of these little blocks, which are slightly irregular, and the tower sits up there very nicely, and then the game is to begin pulling them out. And at some glorious point where everybody roars with laughter, the whole thing collapses. What a good measure. Here is an ecosystem, all interacting. Some changes, but for the most part, great stability. The more complicated it is, the more stable it is. And then you begin to move particular species. A top predator goes out here. A particular type of drought-resistant grass goes out there. And at some point, it goes. You can't predict which in advance, and furthermore, if you rebuild the tower and start again, it'll be something different, which happens this time. But that's the kind of way I like to think about ecosystems and what we're doing to them. The real problem is, of course, habitat loss. If you look at the IUCN reports, you'll see that nearly always it's habitat loss, which is the reason for a species being moved from the situation vulnerable to near threatened, or near threatened to extremely threatened, and so on. And, well, you will be aware of what happens. Palm oil is a product that we use extensively. It's used in lipsticks, it's used in cooking oil, widely used in cooking oil in Africa, for instance. It's used for baking, it's used for biofuel, it's used for making napalm. Did you know that the term napalm comes from palm oil? It's one of the constituents. Very useful product and brings a lot of income from time to time. Anyway, here is the tropical rainforest being cleared for growing palm oil. And here is the refuse from that process. And do recognize that the refuse is the third most closely related animal to ourselves. Okay, there's huge habitat loss, and what we are looking for, surely, if we're going to have any of that 50 million future, is to get a better balance between human beings and the world that supports us. Now, these are approximate figures. I'm not going to lay my hand on my heart and say, here is the hard data. It's not. It's soft data, but it's in the right ballpark. And what it's telling us is that whereas in 1900, we're going back here to prehistoric, but in 1900 here, the proportion of human beings and their domestic livestock was still pretty considerable, but there was a lot of wildlife. What's meant here, I think, are terrestrial mammals. But now, there is a colossal overbalance. The natural world is in grotesque retreat. This blue column is, of course, all the chickens, sheep, pigs, and goats, and cattle, which we are using to feed ourselves and to produce the lifestyle that we like. And here is our biomass up here. There's a big chunk of human beings. That's just bodies, just human flesh, which is occupying a very big bit of the ecosystem. So that's related to this idea of the footprint, the global footprint, which has become quite a popular measure lately. Again, nothing terribly precise about this, but it's in the right ballpark. And you can see that by about the mid-1980s, we were already consuming more than the planet was probably likely to be able to replace in terms of soils, of water table, and of carbon dioxide fixing and so on. And by 2012, we are colossally over. And each year there is now announced Earth Overshoot Day, the day by which the Earth's life support systems have been able to support us and could replace, and after that we're living on capital. We're living on soil, we're draining the water tables, we are pouring on fossil nitrogen in the form of fossil fuel in the form of nitrogen fertilizers, and we are using capital. Nothing very new about that, and this is another way of representing it, but it does relate to something I'm going to speak about later. This is roughly our ecological footprint, and these are projections from the present. And if we go on, what do they call it? Moderate business as usual. Isn't that what every country in the world is trying? Getting back to economic growth? Making sure that in Bangladesh their economic growth comes up to match ours. That's what everybody's trying for. But in terms of the planet, it's going to present very big difficulties. This is rapid reduction. Well, any reduction might be welcome, but it will take us quite some time to get back to sustainability, assuming that the Earth tolerates, and it will tolerate because it's remarkably forgiving if you give it a chance. Now, what I have to do, obviously now, is to go on to human populations, because they've been in the background all the time. And the first thing to put is this well-known figure. David Attenborough is now a patron of this group, Population Matters. And I'm glad to say that I'm a patron of Population Matters, and Jane Goodall is a patron of Population Matters. So I'm in good company. And I will simply quote what he says here. It seems to me a real word of wisdom. All environmental problems become harder and ultimately impossible to solve with ever more people. There is, to me, a universal truth, but don't worry, there will be plenty of deniers. There are plenty of deniers, and that's what we want to speak about now. In a way, there are population deniers, but not in the sense of climate deniers. The group of climate deniers, crazy old Lawson and so on, are people who just don't believe what's in front of them. They deny that human activity is having a major effect on climate. Now, the population deniers, and there is some dispute about facts and timings and so on. The population deniers are not like that, because everybody, I think, agrees it's very easy to measure how many people there are around and how it's growing. What is in dispute is what the implications of that are. And that's why I mentioned not everybody is going to agree with David Attenborough here. Okay, I just like to go back to an old article written by a physicist for fun in the 1960s, which is simply called How Many People Can Live on the Earth? And here he takes a really focused view. The idea, the aim, is to have the maximum number of human beings on the planet. So what can you do? Well, you find that you quite quickly run out of land, but you, of course, can build upwards, and you can have tanks of water in which you're growing algae and so on. And, of course, you have to start recycling everything. I mean, you don't burn bodies, you have to eat them, suitably processed, of course, and so on. Okay, and you have to have, the world gets very hot if there are a lot of large mammals around in it. So you have to cool it, and you use the oceans as a heat sink. And eventually you have to start bridging the oceans to leave more space for you to grow, and the oceans get warmer, and the limit, as Fremlin says, the limit, can't have any more, is when the oceans boil. Once the oceans have warmed to boiling point, that's curtains. By then, he estimates, we would have about 10 to the 16 or 10 to the 18 people on the Earth. At the moment, we've got about 10 to the 9, something like that. So there's a very large increase still possible. But I don't think many of us would feel that's a particularly attractive future. But the point Fremlin's making, mischievously there, is that we are, all of us, in favour of population control in the end. Okay? We have to decide what are we saying? And we'll talk about that a bit later. Now, the UN projections of what's happening to population at the moment do their best. I mean, there are many unknowns. You'll be familiar with this, this kind of graph. This is the hockey stick. And the growth of population over the last century has been absolutely phenomenal. And at best, if things really begin to level out quickly, we would end up at about, in 2100, about a century on from now, with a population slightly lower than it is at present. But the medium figure is the one that's usually been quoted, with about 9 billion, and there's something here which I don't prepare to look at, but I would say that the United Nations has recently had to up the estimate for its medium figure, because at one time they believed that the AIDS epidemic would have a big effect on fertility. Well, it's had an effect on fertility, but not as big as most demographers predicted. And so the medium figure has been up to nearly 11 billion at 2100 at the moment. Now, it's absolutely amazing to me, looking around the world today, that when I've spoken about population to other audiences, people at the end commonly, I assure you, ladies and gentlemen, commonly have said, but don't you think war is the natural population controller? That's one thing. The other thing is, don't you think some disease is going to come along, like Ebola? There's an irony in that. Ebola is around. But, I mean, that's the kind of fatalistic view that is quite common among the general population. Okay, now in terms of course, a growth of population is made up of individual nations. It's made up eventually, of course, of individual families. But there are, and you will be familiar with the kind of pictures here, there are some nations still, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, Africa generally really, where the population structure, this is the number of people at the different ages here, where the population structure has such a gigantic built-in momentum to it. This is Ethiopia in 2010, and a huge proportion of the population is under 25. You can't slow that population down at all rapidly. It's a gigantic issue, and frankly, as I would see, and as most actually of responsible governments in the world see, that this is, you need development to do anything about this, standard economic development, but of course the gigantic numbers of young people are themselves a barrier to that. Now that used to be shrugged aside, but it's no longer shrugged aside because there's plenty of good news. There are, for instance, if one put up 10 or 15 years ago, Vietnam or Colombia, parts of Southeast Asia or China, you would see similar structures, but not now. All of those countries, the great majority of Southeast Asia, the great majority of South America, have managed to curb their birth rates quite considerably. Not by any very active admonitions, but just because as people become more prosperous, well, they tend to put their stress on other things than simply having enough children to keep you alive at the end of your life, and so on. So there is plenty of good news around, but all I'm suggesting here is that this is a situation which Africa is really going to have to face particularly. Now here's ourselves, and it's a much more flat-sided thing, but you can see governments are really worried about not having enough people. And this boost at the end here has come as a welcome relief to many in conventional economics field. But we do have, as we all know, a big bulge of middle-aged people who are going to need pensions. More of that in a moment. Now, of course, when we're thinking of the impact which our humanity has on the environment, the way it's commonly looked at is this. I equals PAT, and the impact is the population times the affluence and times technology. The more people you have, if you have a lot of people who are affluent, that's going to make a big effect on impact. High technology is likely to do so as well. But there are trade-offs you could have here. And of course, very commonly people will say, well, look, anybody in Bangladesh has only the 16th of the impact which you or I have. And that's fair enough. But of course, we're hoping, aren't we, that the impact of people in Bangladesh will get rather bigger because they're living at a very poor standard by our standards now. So, but that is the kind of thing to keep in mind. There are trade-offs possible. If we wanted to go like Fremlin and have P maximised, I think affluence would have to go down. Technology would certainly have to go up. You can imagine how you can play with these issues. But what it's really doing is playing with the futures of human beings, human life. Well now, what seems to me absolutely certain about the modern world and the future is that there is a general feeling, I think, which is growing, it's not always very articulate, that things aren't what they ought to be, that we can't go on like this, and that we will need and will receive some kicks on the shin, of which the most obvious kick on the shin is climate change. It's interesting, isn't it, that back in 87, I think it was, Mrs. Thatcher was the first person in the British government to declare that climate change was going to be a problem. All credit to her. It's hard for me to give her any credit, but I do for that. And many people now speak of what's called the perfect storm. The perfect storm being a mounting demand on resources, climate change as a result, and growing population. So, population growth is the ultimate global issue in my view. I'm concentrating on that from now on. And what I find absolutely commonly that we cope, there is a lot of denial around. A huge amount of denial. People just don't want to talk about it. When I, as I commonly go, stick my neck out and talk about population, this is a very common response I get. And you will undoubtedly have had it yourselves. It's not population. There's enough for everybody if we only shared it out properly and so on. Now, again, I would just ask you to remember necessary and sufficient. I'm not arguing that just reducing the birth rate is going to solve the problems of poverty. It manifestly is not. But without reducing the birth rate, eventually we're going to be climbing a down escalator. And I wish that I could get the general running of environmental charities, if I can call them that in the broadest sense, to accept this. I've recently been involved with the Friends of the Earth in Scotland, who wanted to revise their policy on population. And we had some discussion about it, not just myself, but many others. And at the end, they still refused to concentrate, to accept, that population is a big factor. They always want to concentrate on greed, inequality, poverty. I understand that. So does Oxfam, so does Save the Children, so does CAFOD. Of course, CAFOD would, wouldn't it? The Catholic group. But there does seem a great reluctance to allow that what may be necessary is not going to be sufficient. Let's try to be realistic about our human predicament. Now, I want to concentrate now on the United Kingdom, because I think that a rich nation, an old nation, a rich nation, it's our first duty to start at home. And we need, in my view, to take our numbers in hand and accept, far from it so far, that more means worse in numbers of people I'm thinking of. Now, at the present moment, where the UK is 64 million, and it's growing faster than it has done for decades. We've added 5 million people since 2001 and 10 million since 1964. Well, you know, I was in the chair of natural history. Well, no, not quite in 64, but I was certainly teaching in Edinburgh. And since then, we've added a couple of cities pretty nearly the size of London. And Scotland, 5.3 million. That's greater population than New Zealand or Norway. And yet one hears calls that Scotland needs more people. Now, for centuries, of course, family size didn't matter very much beyond the family. It affected the parents' lifestyle in a big way, and most especially the mother, but it wasn't open to much question. Contraception was rare, and poor children offered some support and labour, and they still do in some poor countries. And the rich people in Britain used wet nurses, which meant that they were incredibly fertile. Do have a look at some of those 16th century tombs in the churches in England mostly, where you will find the mother and father praying away there with their gigantic brood of 11 or 12 children praying beside them. No lactational amenorrhea for the wealthy. Now, that's a fairly blunt statement of my credo. More means worse, and we don't need any more people in Britain. We need fewer people in Britain. That's my credo. And there are hurdles to getting this across at a general public level. Obvious hurdles. And the first one is the eternal quest for growth in virtually everything. That's plan A. There is no plan B. The struggles of all the governments in Europe and through much of the rest of the world is to get economic growth going fast. That means big consumption of resources. We need lots of people to produce things. Well, there are not so many as we used, but people produce things, and then we need people to buy them. How often have you heard on the news, there's good news from the high street, spending has gone up. That's the way that we measure things, isn't it? Well, and behind all this is the idea that more people are a good thing. Many people in the standard economic field of activity would feel that if 10 people now stand where 5 stood before, that in and of itself represents progress. That has been the conventional credo. Now, that anybody who suggests otherwise will be attacked. Here is a very nice example. I'm trying to get population on the agenda of a group in Cambridge who have excellent discussion meetings with the great and the good, academics, civil servants and so on about various issues. This was one about cities, and Mark Kleinman was there. He's an economist, an advisor to old Boris Johnson down in London. And somebody asked a question, what about growth? Do you think London is already too big? And he said this: I always worry about the ghost of Malthus looking over my shoulder. We all know what Malthus said: population cannot possibly expand. We know it can. Oh, sure. It's done so in a big way. But that isn't quite an adequate answer for somebody who ought to be trying to bring a fairly rational and intellectual approach to an issue. We are attacked from the right. This is a fairly standard response. Given half a page in the Times last year, and the Institute of Economic Affairs is a think tank which is much used by the government. I mean, the government listens to what it says. And here is its director expressing his view about population. I'm assuming he's right-wing. At least I shouldn't think he votes Labour very much. But here we are from the left. I added emphasis at the end here. How can there possibly be too many of us? Now, I say this is from the left because this guy, Peril, is a sociologist, and he was one of the founder members of the Revolutionary Communist Society. Not the Communist Society, the Revolutionary Communist Society. So I'm assuming he's a fairly left-wing character, but he agrees with the right-wing economists that everything is okay, and that's what will be done. Now, when I query this, when I mean the people of my persuasion query this, we are told that we are ignorant of economics. We don't understand economics. I accept that. I find much of economics extremely difficult. But what I would say is that my ignorance of economics is matched by their ignorance of biology. They have no concept of how the world, how the planet actually runs. And I'm amazed that they have such faith, because as we know, economists will argue both sides of almost any policy. Should we spend more or should we cut? You will find Nobel laureates in economics arguing both sides of those questions in the States and here. You would think that this might give a little pause for reflection amongst economists. They are not dealing with an exact science, they're dealing with applied human psychology effectively. And it's always going to be difficult. I was very, very encouraged to learn recently that at the beginning of this academic session in Manchester, the students who were reading economics staged a protest because they were being given in the first year the standard old perpetual growth economics. And they said, we're not having this. This is irrelevant to the modern world. We want to understand why the world got into the confounded economic mess which it has done over the last 5 years. You're not explaining this to us. Conventional theories will not do it. And a number of their staff came out in protest as well. That's the best possible thing that can happen. Start to question the dogmas. Really important. And one of the important people who does this is an economist from the University of Surrey, Tim Jackson, who's written an excellent book, Progress Without Growth, which I recommend to you. But I just wanted to quote a couple of paragraphs from his foreword. Every society clings to a myth by which it lives. Ours is the myth of economic growth. For the last 5 decades, the pursuit of growth has been the single most important policy goal across the world. It remains so, of course, we know. The global economy is almost 5 times the size it was half a century ago. If it continues to grow at the same rate, the economy will be 80 times of that size by the year 2100. 80 times. He concludes, prosperity consists in our ability to flourish as human beings within the ecological limits of a finite planet. The challenge for our society is to create the conditions under which this is possible. It is the most urgent task of our times. Excellently put, and coming from an economist, this is infinitely valuable. So there is this business of the pursuit of growth and how on earth we can get away from it. Now, this is the kind of thing that modern economics is playing around with, some of it, more advanced economics. The gross, we all know about gross domestic product, which is what we're claiming, and what Jackson has just said will be 80 times what it is now by 2100, given that there weren't any constraints, and there are a few. But we know that GDP is a lump thing. I mean, good and bad things go in there. If there is a lot of money being laundered because of the drug barons, that all adds to GDP. If a lot of people die, well, the undertakers do well. Do you remember a marvellous Ronald Searle cartoon some years ago, a couple of undertakers standing at a bar, dressed in your black drape, and so on, and one of them is saying to the other, I hear the cost of living is rising. So that's what we measure. Now, here's something, the genuine progress indicator. And as it says here, but a metric for life satisfaction called GPI has not. But you can't really measure this very accurately, of course. I'm not putting a great strain, a great deal of stress on these figures. But what it means is you go around, you have many surveys. How do you feel about satisfaction with life? Do you think that your children are going to be better off than you, and so on and so forth? And one gets various indicators. And certainly one knows that in the States, people's attitudes towards the future are certainly don't rise with income. There's a quite clear, I mean, that's no surprise to any of us. Money can't buy happiness, okay? That's completely the case. And so one tries to, this kind of thing is useful to batter the hardline economists with, but you can't take it terribly much further yet. Now, that was one hurdle then to getting across the idea that Britain is overpopulated. The economic growth hurdle, conventional economic growth. The second hurdle is, of course, a more emotional, personal one. How could a government possibly interfere so as to suggest that people should have fewer children? How could it suggest that having more children was a bad thing? Now, certainly, that has been shied away by most governments. And here we have the coalition coming in. This was in 2011. Well, that's fair enough. I would, thank the Lord for small mercies, but I must say I haven't heard much talking about global population growth and its impacts from the government. Doesn't seem to feature very highly on their agenda. And anyway, what it really means is that they feel they can't say anything about it. They could not do it. But of course, if we think back through history, we think just today, governments, religious leaders have for centuries been encouraging people to have more children. Legislation has made it very difficult sometimes. Abortion has been illegal. Contraception has been extremely difficult and expensive to get hold of. Exhortations have come. Chris West, back from Australia after a long spell there, telling me that one of the government ministers of the Interior arguing that Australia needed more people. wants to get up to 26 million or something like that. Have one for mum, one for dad, and one for Australia. How about that as an exhortation? Isn't that interfering with people's personal choice? However, we know where they are. But they think it's too sensitive. But here I believe, and this is some good news, that they are lagging behind public opinion. The public opinion has gone ahead of this. I was absolutely delighted to see in the Times, the stuffy old Times, just a couple of weeks ago, the heading for their letters page, it was about the housing crisis. And the heading of the main letter, "Do we need more housing or fewer people?" That says it all. That says it all. And then he goes on to stress the various ways the sky, in which predictions are that our population is going to increase. Now, of course, it's not quite as simple as all that. But look, a few years ago, the YouGov held a poll asking people about their views of numbers of people in Britain. And that's a pretty striking result. So I put the Scottish figures in red down the side here. The proportions are not really very different. Now, I accept completely that you can't just take this at its face value. People who say there are too many people in Britain haven't really thought through the implications of what they're saying there. Nevertheless, this is an enormous preponderance. Surely here we have the possibility for a decent discussion, what would be called in the modern jargon, a transparent discussion of these issues. You certainly could put it to the public that maybe there's an issue that we could be talking about here. Of course, there is, what I think is behind this figure is a big sense of crowding. And that is, of course, inexorably linked with the problem of immigration. And recently been in correspondence with people suggesting that our worries about immigration are exacerbated by the fact it's not really the immigration that's the problem, it's the numbers that are the problem. That actually our worry about numbers makes us anti-immigrant. It's not the other way round. And I think that is something that needs to be explored in much more detail. Needless to say, people who express this opinion are, as I have had many times, are likely to be called fascist, racist, anti-human. That is the extent of our denial. We don't look at the real issue at all. We have to move beyond, I think, the standard popular arguments and begin to face some awkward issues about human reproduction, fair and square. Because here, as a biologist, I cannot look at us without regarding ourselves as being an animal species. I mean, we're rather special, but we are an animal species. And we're in an outbreak situation at the moment, which is quite familiar in some systems. And outbreaks are nearly always followed by crashes. And we would obviously wish to avoid that. But look, if you go to the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, you will find that it is a right, a human right, to marry freely, have a family, and have as many children as you choose, when you choose. That is a human right. I just don't think that's good enough. It's certainly not true in most societies. You don't have a right to have as many children as you like because the state, our society, is inevitably affected and is playing a big part. We don't let children, for various reasons, parenting may be inadequate. We don't let children just gather in the centre of the road as they did in Kenya many years ago and live on their own. We don't let them wander around loose, the state has to pick it up. They are involved inevitably with a responsibility for all citizens. We are all involved in that together. So your child is not just your child. We have to progress beyond that. Now, I understand all the nanny state fears, but it's all very well. But if you have a large family, you may say, and there are many admirable ones in which people are saying, I've got a large number of children, but we're not on benefits, we're all growing up to be good citizens. Fair enough, that's fine. But at the end of the road, they all have to take a part in Britain. They will want a job, they will want space, they will want a house, they will want all the infrastructure that goes with it as well. The state is a state. The state has to become much larger, in my view. Of course, the bogeyman here is that that sounds like the communist society, and one has this image of the Soviet Union in which not only oppressive, but the shop windows were full of piles of shoes that nobody wanted to buy because the state produced shoes and nobody wanted to buy them, and so on. All those ludicrous aspects. So we have to decide between what is the state's responsibility for a good society and what other things one has to obviously leave society to private enterprise to make, e.g. shoes and so on. Now, you may think this is getting very far-fetched, but I'm intrigued and puzzled that at this moment, a council in the north of England is attempting a criminal prosecution of a woman who drank heavily during pregnancy, produced a fetal alcohol syndrome child, which is having to be looked after by the council. And the council is, I was amazed by this, is apparently attempting to sue the woman for criminal damages. Now that, to me, sounds quite remarkable development, given the way in which we are supposed to be not interfering at all with this intimate business of personal choice. But I think we have to get away from this idea that children are just your children. One of the troubles is that whilst you may find, as we do here, 65% of people think that Britain should have fewer children, we live in what's effectively a terribly pro-natalist society. Look at this. These are old ones, but in fact they're repeated in various ways. And now I'm not knocking against Linda, who wanted to get a girl, or against the Countess, who wanted to get a boy, but do recognise that in their quest to get a son or a daughter, they dumped on the planet. And we can laugh at it, but and one should, that's the best thing to do. But in fact, I regard this as disgusting. What it is the trivialization of bringing another human being into existence. That is an awesome responsibility, I think. It's a very natural thing. It's got to be natural. Babies are wonderful. We want the human race to go on. But we must recognize our responsibility in this regard. Now, not very much nudging is required in Britain, I think. This is the situation in 2011, where 20% of women have no children. The commonest mode is 38% with 2. But we have quite a large proportion here. And if you look at the 3s and the 4s, you find that the first 2 children are more likely to be of one sex. So in other words, there are lucky Lindas in here. And it isn't good enough, is my feeling. We have to begin to think properly about human reproduction and the responsibility of it. Now, that's just my view, okay? There are other scenarios. I mentioned Fremlin. We could go down the Fremlin road. We wouldn't go perhaps to bridging the seas and waiting for them to boil, but we might say, well, 12 billion people might be rather nice. There might be a lot of extra Mozarts in there, and so on. And there are many people who feel that the denial of humanity, of numbers, is a bad thing, like that man Faraday. How can there possibly be too many for us? Now, at the end of the day, though, I think we are all population controllers, and what I would accept is a policy simply of nudging here, of being absolutely prepared to speak about what the responsibilities are of parenthood, and further to just take an issue, a simple one now. Britain's population is likely to rise to 70 million by 2030. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Why don't we just come out and say that? We had the Office of National Statistics coming out and saying, that's what's likely to happen. It will mean this extra number of houses, this more roads, this more production of food, etc., etc. But nobody's saying, do we want that? And what would stop it happening? And the short-term fixes of Britain in general and Scotland in particular, saying that we need more people because we're running out, we've got a preponderance of old people. Well, think of old Bernie Madoff. If you're going to run a Ponzi scheme, what you do is to get in some young people to pay off the old ones who are in there already. The young people you get in to help Scotland's demographic profile, they're going to grow up. They're going to want a pension. So we're going to have more young people in. There's no end to this, is there? It is absolutely fatuous. At some point, it has to be grasped. And the time to grasp it was, of course, 50 years ago. Wasn't done. And we are, I think, under extra pressure as a result of that. Now, in view of what I've been saying, let me end by saying that I really do like human beings. I mean, I think the human race is an admirable thing, and I want it to go on. I mean, my bosom swelled with pride to hear of what happened at Rosetta yesterday, at 300 million miles away. We launched a probe onto a comet. That's a fantastic achievement. Got nothing to do, of course, with sustainability, I agree, but it does indicate that when the human intellect is firing on all cylinders, we can achieve great things. And we're going to need all that intellect and ingenuity for everything that we're going to do. But I just hope that we can keep sufficient control on ourselves that we do not overwhelm the rest of the planet. That will be very bad for us. In the end, it'll be lethal for us, but it will also have many awful things. Edmund Burke said it all. And boy, I would like that to be up there, hanging up in the cabinet room. But I wanted to finish on this picture because for me, it says everything I love about the natural world and our place in it. It's a lone bull elephant in his non-reproductive time when they wander alone, often for many hundreds of kilometers. They're completely alone. Occasionally, a satellite younger male may be kicking around in the background, but for the most part, they're on their own. There he is. And he needs a lot of space. And there are a lot of pressures on that space. And what I feel, I suppose, is that I wouldn't want to grow up in a world where there was no space for elephants. They're a symbol of everything else. So I've stuck my head on the block, if you like, and please.
Thank you very much, Aubrey. A most thought-provoking talk, and I'm sure each one of us is going to mull over a number of the dimensions that you touched on for quite some time. I think we just have time for maybe one or two quick questions before I'm going to ask Aubrey to hand on his ceremonial tribal elder baton. So may we take one or two questions? Yes, please.
You mentioned the hope that they are. When the Australian person is saying, the third one for Australia. To me, we are heading, there's nothing much we can do, we're heading in the wrong direction. How can we hold people accountable for steering us in that wrong direction?
Well, I'm afraid, sir, I think that I mentioned kicks on the shin, which are going to come from the planet. And I mean, even the hardline growth economists recognize that it's going to be very expensive to evade the effects of climate change over the next century. But secondly, I'm losing my thread. I think that we have to get just a recognition of the scale of things. And I believe that it's just not going to be good enough to run along the same way as now. I suppose what I'm fumbling around to say is that I do actually fear that things will have to get worse before they can get better. I think there are warning signs around. Things aren't quite what they used to be. And it always reminds me, Joan and I, my wife, love old science fiction movies, and the disaster movies where chap's motoring along in his Jeep in the world and everything's fine and normal, and then something funny appears to be happening. And we always say, well, he's a small bit actor, he's going to go now. And that's what worries me is this, that as we go along, there are some things which just don't match up quite well. And what we need is, first of all, to be a bit concerned about this. I think the worry is a good thing. But by all means, let's talk about the actual issues here. I do believe that I know that some MPs do agree with this, but if somebody can only come up and get a, what is it called, a closing time debate or something in the House of Commons on what should the optimum population of Britain be. Is it a good thing if we rise to 70 million? Just to get that discussed in the House of Commons would, to me, be an enormously good thing. No quick solutions, though, are there? I mean, and it won't be easy.
And do we have one final question to close? Yes, please.
If you were Prime Minister and you weren't in a coalition government, and therefore you could put forward 3 main policies to address these issues tonight, what would the top 3 be?
I thought you were going to say if I became fascist dictator for a day.
It's the way you're wielding that stick.
I think the first one would be to recognise that there are limits to growth. We have to live in a finite planet. We are a rich nation, and we must begin to limit our resource consumption. I think we can encourage the rest of the world thereby. I think I would also put out, never have more than 2 children. That, I think, would be part of a campaign. Every child a wanted child, meaning wanted from before conception. And there are a lot of figures bandied around, but some people, argue that as many as 40% of conceptions are unplanned. That doesn't mean to say they're unwanted in the end, because babies have a way of locking themselves around your heart. But that's not good enough. That is not good enough in the future. And well, there are 2 things. What would be the third thing? Try to gather food from close to your home. In other words, try to stop lorries thrashing up and down the country carrying food. But the first 2 are much the most important, I think. Accept limits, never more than 2 children. try to live local. It's the Friends of the Earth slogan, which is an excellent thing. Think globally, act locally. That's it. That's what one would be doing with a population policy.
Thank you. So, your last duty, Aubrey, as RZSS Tribal Elder, November 2014, is to kindly hand over the ceremonial baton to a gentleman in the audience tonight. He's one of our own, if I can put it that way, gentleman who spent 16 years of his life in Uganda, first with the Colonial Police, then as a chief warden at Murchison Falls, and finally as head of the Uganda National Park System. He then came to Edinburgh with his wife Jeannie to head up the RZSS, which he did for 26 years, which is a phenomenal time to spend at the helm here. I'd like to welcome Professor Roger Wheater, OBE, as our next tribal elder for April of 2015. Roger, would you please come accept the ceremonial baton from Aubrey?
Thank you. You've set the bar very high for the April talk, I have to say. But fascinatingly, some years ago, I was speaking in Edinburgh, not as eloquently as you were, but about the problems of population in relation to tiger conservation. And I said, it's just too many people, but the Indians have put reserves aside to keep the tigers, but the tigers breed and they go out of the reserve and they interface with people, and then you get problems. And at the end of my talk, a man stood up, he said, Mr. Wheater, I think you are totally illogical. He said, one moment you're complaining about there being too many humans, then you're complaining that the tigers are eating them.
Well,
ladies and gentlemen, my name is Jeremy Peat. I'm chair of the trustees of the Royal Zoological Society, and it was on that basis that I was asked to say a vote of thanks, and not because I am an economist. Now, I would claim not to be a hardcore growth at all costs economist, and I think they are actually, I'm glad to say, a dying breed. I was at an event at the Royal Society of Edinburgh last night when we were actually talking about focusing more on well-being than on growth. And this is something that I think within Scotland there is progress being made. We have something called the National Performance Framework, where we judge policies. And that includes not just is it going to make more money for more people, but are people going to be more contented? And a great number of activities are considered, including volunteering, and there are many volunteers here, which add hugely to well-being of those who volunteer and those who are volunteered to, if I can put it that way. So I think we are getting to the stage now when all legislation in Scotland is going to have to think about well-being. I think the population dimension, the environmental dimension, clearly has to be added as well. But you have given us huge food for thought, and that is what tribal elders are asked to do. And frankly, I thought, he's got to follow Jane Goodall, the poor man. Hey, you did it. You did it magnificently. And now Roger's got to follow you. So he's already planning his talk, but we have the great honour of having Roger on the board of the RZSS now, so he keeps us in order. He is our conscience, if you like, and that's wonderful to have Roger with us. Now, we have 2 or 3 things to finish the evening. First of all, Kathy has a little something for you as a commemoration.
Yes, I do. So, Aubrey, I need you to come back up to the front.
So we bring you back up, and this is something produced within the RZSS.
This is. And where's John? John Ramsey. Where are you? Come on, John, could you just stand up for a second, please? Just so everybody knows who you are. John Ramsey is not only a long-standing blacksmith here at Edinburgh Zoo, but he is also about to be named our sculptor in residence because he has produced the Sumatran rhinos that Aubrey loves so much. Thank you, John. Fantastic.
That's wonderful. That's terrific. I can't lift it.
I'm not going to ask you.
Don't trust it to a one-handed man. That would be very rash.
There you are.
Could not be nicer. I'm
And
deeply
notice,
grateful. Thank you
just
very
one
much.
offspring. So
I wouldn't mind twins there.
So, finally, one final thanks to Aubrey for a magnificent lecture. See you all again in April, and I hope very much before then. Thank you very much.